This is Mission Control Houston back here in the Space Shuttle Flight Control Room. We're about 31 minutes away from the crew wake-up call. We're going to take a moment to give you a quick overview of the 3 spacewalks that are planned for the mission once Discovery docks with the International Space Station, the first of which is due to begin on Tuesday with astronauts Mike Fossum and Ron Guerin. This is Mission Control Houston.
We start out on EVA-1 with the JPM in the payload bay. EV-1, Mike Fossum, has moved down to the port side of Node 2, where he will be working with the shuttle robotic arm operator to coordinate a task to remove 2 launch restraint straps from the elbow camera of the arm. These straps were flown in place to keep the elbow camera from vibrating during launch and perhaps impacting the radiators on the payload bay doors or the GEM module itself. After the straps are removed, they'll move the arm away and perform a quick pan and tilt check to make sure that the camera is able to rotate. When Mike is done with this task, he'll move over on the port side of Node 2 to the Active Common Berthing Mechanism, or ACBM. This is the port where the JPM will be berthed later on this flight day. He will inspect the surfaces and make sure everything looks like it's supposed to, and then he'll also open up a window cover that's in the center of this view. It's not shown here in the video, but the porthole that you see in the middle is what would be covered by that window cover. He'll open that up so the IV crew or the crew inside the vehicle can set up a camera that will aid in the berthing of the JPM to this port. He'll then move down to the Nader ACBM and repeat that same operation on this window cover. And this is the port where the MPLM logistics module will be mated during the ULF-2 flight. When he's completed that task, he will translate up to the front face of the truss, where he will go on to the mobile transporter to complete the ready-to-latch checkout that we talked about earlier. And from this location, he'll also, when he is completed and the boom has been released from ISS, which is what EV2 is working on currently, he will work from this position to help release the keep alive umbilical from the boom. So here's the ready-to-latch indicators. So while EV-1, Mike Fossum, is completing all of those tasks, Ron Guerin will be working on the starboard truss to prepare the boom to be handed off to the station arm, which will then take it and hand it off to the shuttle arm. His first task is this keep alive umbilical has several Velcro straps that he will release, and that will allow the cable to have some slack so that the station arm can move the boom around a little bit while we're releasing it from the station, and then we can keep it powered for as long as possible so that our power down time for the sensors is minimized. The second task that Ron Guerin will be performing is to translate to the midpoint of the boom, and he will be working on this first of 2 OSEs, or orbital support equipment. These are the stanchions that are mounting the boom to ISS. He releases the first one, and when he is complete with that, he will give the station arm operator a go to complete their rigidization of the SSRMS, or station arm, to the boom. When he is complete with that, he will translate down to the outboard side of the boom. And out here, he's got 2 tasks to complete. The first one is going to be to remove a bag, which we'll show shortly here, which was installed over the sensor package area by STS-123. This protective cover was put in place to help protect the sensor packages thermally and also from orbital debris during its stay on orbit. The next task that he'll be completing is to release the second of the 2 orbital support equipment structures here. And once he's released this, the boom will be completely under the control of the station arm and released from the truss. At that point, both crew members will meet back up at the inboard side of the boom. EV-1 will climb out onto the boom to release the keep alive umbilical. So there's some choreography here with the ground team to put the inhibits in place, and we'll start our thermal clock as soon as those inhibits are in place. And EV-1 again will release what is called the CAD, or Keep Alive Umbilical Attach Device, which is the part that actually structurally attaches the umbilical to the boom. He will hand off that piece of equipment along with the cable to EV-2. EV-2 is going to finish cleaning up that work site and stowing the cable and the CAD, while EV-1 at that time will move off to the payload bay to begin preparing the JPM for removal. The last part of the cleanup for EV-2 is to go back and revisit both of these orbital support equipment structures. There are several rotational joints on each that he will lock out to their most rigid position in order for it to be in a good configuration for its stay on orbit. When he's complete with that, Ron Guerin will move to the airlock and drop off a bag full of some tools that he was using for the OBSS release, and then he will translate down to the payload bay to meet up with EV1 Mike Fossum. Both crew members will translate down the port sill of the payload bay, and they have two main tasks to complete in the aft portion of the payload bay. The first one is completed by Mike Fossum, which is to remove some heater cables called LTA cables, and these power the shell heaters for the module while it's in the payload bay. He'll remove those cables and then stow them on a stanchion on the sill of the vehicle, and then both crew members will work on removing 8 contamination covers from the passive common berthing mechanism, or PCBM. This is the surface that will mate the JPM to node 2. Each of these covers will be removed by Mike Fossum and handed up to Ron Guerin, who will then stow them in a bag. Once he has received all of those covers and packaged the bag, he will translate back down the port sill with that bag to the airlock to stow it. EV1 will also translate back down the port sill, but on his way out of the payload bay, he will stop off on the forward side of the payload bay on the JPM, and he will be working on one of 2 window shutters. There are 3 bolts that lock the window shutter in place for launch for each of the window shutters. He will work on what will be the forward window shutter once this is installed on station. The aft one, which is just immediately to the right of that one, is partially obstructed by the GEM RMS end effector, so we will save that one for EVA 3 when the GEM RMS has been partially deployed. The last task for EVA 1 is the tasks out on the starboard Sarge. Both crew members will be out here. They will be working in parallel on different tasks. EV2 will be working on the trundle bearing assembly, while EV1 Mike Fossum works on an inspection of the data may surface and some cleaning DTO activities. So here is the trundle bearing assembly that Ron Guerin is installing. It has 2 parts. There's a mount assembly that attaches to the inboard ring, and then there's a bearing assembly that attaches to the mount and then clamps 3 roller bearings around the outboard ring. And this basically allows the outboard ring to rotate relative to the inboard ring. There are 12 of these total installed on the Sarge. This flashing point is actually the place where the trundle bearing is being installed, and then they will reinstall the protective cover on the Sarge. So while Ron is completing that, Mike will be removing 2 protective covers from the Sarge to give himself enough race ring to work with for all of the DTO objectives, or the detailed test objective for the cleaning DTO. This is the data may surface, which is what he'll do first. This is the area of interest that was investigated on the last flight with a crew equipment hook, which is a fairly rounded piece of hardware. We will revisit this spot with a little sharper tools to be able to try to get a little bit better tactile feedback. So here we have a crew member using what is the feeler gauge. It's normally used for RCC repair techniques. We are flying one specifically for this task, and it has not been modified, but will be used for this particular function. He will drag the tip of this across the area of interest to determine whether it is a divot and therefore maybe the start of some damage to the ring, or whether it's a deposit. The next task is in relation to the damaged outer canted surface, and this is the detailed test objective to try out the cleaning techniques. So Mike Fossum will use a suite of tools, the scraper probably being the main one, which is pictured in hand here. And then he's also got what amounts to basically a large flathead screwdriver, which is on the left side of your screen. He'll have some brake coat and a grease gun that looks basically like your standard caulk gun that he can apply and spread on the ring to see if that helps remove debris. And here is a glove box test where we pressurize the gloves to make sure that they have good tactile feedback between the tools and the work site. When he's complete with all of these tasks, he'll reinstall the protective covers. The crew members will clean up the work site and head back to the airlock. And that will complete all of the tasks for the first EVA on the mission. For EVA 2, we can see the configuration is updated and the JPM is now installed on the Node 2 port side. The crew will be working mostly on the end cone on the port side of the JPM for their preparation out here. The first task for EV1 Mike Fossum is to install one of 2 of the camera groups. This camera, again, is used to view the GEM RMS clearance views. This camera is called a JTVE, or a GEM television external camera. It's one of the 2 that will be installed. These cameras will also help with views of the exposed facility after it is installed on Flight 2JA. So while EV1 is installing the aft camera, EV2, Ron Guerin will be installing the forward camera, which is a mirror image of the one that Mike just installed. Both of these cameras will have a launch lock that will need to be removed to allow the camera to function. And once the crew is complete with all their tasks on the end cone and moved clear The ground will power these cameras up and verify their functionality. The next task for the crew members is to move to the robotic arm on the JPM. It's called the GEM RMS. There are 6 joints. Each of those joints has a thermal cover, and then the end effector also has a thermal cover, so 7 covers total to be removed here. Here they are labeled. Covers 1 and 2 cover up the shoulder joints, and then 4, 5, and 6 are known as the wrist cluster, and then there's the end effector. Cover 3 is out of view here, but we have another picture for that. It is on the nadir side of the module. I think we have a short video here showing the crew at the Kennedy Space Center removing cover 3 on the flight hardware. Each of these covers will have 2 quarter-turn fasteners that hold it in place. The crew will release each of those quarter-turn fasteners, which will allow the cover to come off. Once the cover is removed, you can see a shiny silver object on the lower part of the screen, and that is actually the joint electronics unit, the electronics for each joint, and that is what we're actually protecting with this cover. Each of the covers also has 2 grounding wires that the crew will disconnect. Those are just connected with the Velcro to the joint itself. After the covers have all been removed and packed in a bag, the crew will move to the zenith side of the JPM to begin preparing the zenith active common berthing mechanism for the JLP relocate, which again will occur on flight day 7. The first task is to remove a 2-part MLI cover that covers the entire surface of the ACBM. These are 2 fairly large covers that the crew will remove and then stow in a bag. Here's a picture of the flight hardware of those. And then with the covers removed, the berthing mechanism underneath. The crew will inspect all of the surfaces and make sure the ACBM looks as it should, and then we'll remove a pit pin from the hatch mechanism, which is actually a launch lock for the hatch mechanism. And then the last task on this is to release a couple of launch locks, a couple of bolts really, that are holding these deployable MMOD shields in place for launch. We'll see these a little bit more on EVA 3, and it'll be a little more clearer how they're used. But these basically deploy to protect the mating surface between the JLP and the JPM from orbital debris. The last task on the JPM is to install trunnion covers. The trunnions are these metal posts that help attach the module in the payload bay. On orbit, they form a heat sink, so we install these covers to help prevent any concerns of condensation inside the vehicle. After that task is complete, the crew will move off to work on the preparation of their nitrogen tank assemblies. EV2, Ron Guerin, will move off to the starboard nitrogen tank to prepare that, while EV1, Mike Fossum, will work his way out to ESP3 on the port side of the truss to prepare the spare nitrogen tank assembly. On his way, he'll pick up this APFR articulating portable foot restraint. This foot restraint will be the base that he'll work from on EVA 3 to remove the spare NTA from ESP3 and temp stow it on the opposite side of the platform, which will be more clear again on the video for EVA 3. So he'll translate that out here, and then he will install that foot restraint on the zenith side of the ESP3. After that's complete, he'll open up a little MLI cover here, which exposes the NTA, or nitrogen tank assembly. He will release the 4 bolts. They're set for launch loads, and he will release torque on those and then reset them within the pistol grip tool's range to speed up the operation on EVA 3. He'll also, on the opposite side of that NTA, install a couple of thermal covers over the quick disconnects to keep them from overheating during the translation between ESP3 and S1. While he's doing that, EV2, Ron Guerin, is moved to the back side of the truss, and he is going to work on the back side of the NTA on this side. He will open up what we call the shower curtain MLI here. It slides down. The NTA has some nitrogen lines that are connected between it and the ATA, or the ammonia tank assembly, which is immediately to the left there, the large box. So he'll disconnect the nitrogen lines from the ammonia tank and stow them on some dummy ports on the nitrogen tank assembly, and then close up the shroud. He'll also install the same thermal covers over the quick disconnects that EV1 did out at ESP3. The ground will begin venting the lines of the NTA to keep them from overpressurizing during the transfer from S1 to ESP3. On the front side of the truss, EV2 will complete a couple of tasks on the NTA to get it in its final configuration for EVA 3. The first of the tasks is the same as what EV1 performed out on ESP3, and that is to break torque on all 4 of the bolts holding this to the truss and then reset them within the limits of the pistol grip tool. And then there are 3 electrical connectors that he will demate and then pull the cables back out of the way and stow them inside of the truss. At the end of this, the NTA is only in place by those 4 bolts that will be removed on EVA 3, and then the NTA can be removed from its rails. When he is complete with that, he will translate out to the port side of the truss to join up with EV1, where they will retrieve the final item on this EVA, which is the external television camera group. This is on the far outboard side of P1 on the nadir side. The first thing they'll do is release a bolt and then install a handling aid to give them something to hold onto this thing with. Swing it behind themselves on their body restraint tether, and then they will work their way back to the airlock after they've cleaned up the work site and get this thing in the airlock. And that will complete all of our tasks on EVA 2. Well, this is going to be a very robotic-intensive EVA. Ron Guerin will be on the station arm for a good chunk of the EVA for the NTA R&R. Because of the distance between the S1 NTA and the spare on ESP3, the crew will have to install what is called a whiff extender along with their foot restraint, and that basically, in effect, is just increasing the reach of the arm so that we can span the gap between these 2 locations. So the crew will set up the arm with that whiff extender and foot restraint, and EV2 will then ingress the APFR and begin to prep the NTA for removal. So Ron will release the 4 bolts that we reset on EVA 2 and then install a handling aid to help him during the translation. And then he will, along with the help of the robotic arm operator, pull the NTA out of S1. While he has been completing all that, Mike Fossum has been working his way down to ESP3 on the port side of the vehicle, where he has gotten into the APFR, pulled back the MLI tent, and then he has released the bolts that are holding the NTA in place. He will then pull the NTA out, flip it over, and temp stow it on the opposite side of the ESP3 to get it out of the way so that when Ron gets here with the empty tank, he can install it directly into the housing on ESP3. So we'll see all that here in animation. EV1, Mike Fossum has now moved to the front side or forward face of the ESP3 in order to help guide the NTA into its position. You can see now as we move around that temp stow location for the spare NTA. And now the coordination between Mike Fossum, Ron Guerin, and our station arm operator will continue as they install this empty NTA now into the MLI tent. Ron Guerin will drive 1 bolt to make sure that the NTA is secured, and then he will remove his handling aid, move it over to the spare NTA. Then he will retrieve that spare NTA and begin moving that back to S1. Mike Fossum will stay behind and clean up the work site, making sure the bolts get all torqued down on the empty NTA. And Ron will get a nice ride on the station arm back to S1. He'll remove his handling aid and secure all of the 4 bolts. And then he's got 3 electrical connectors to go remate to power the nitrogen tank assembly. And then he'll remove all the hardware from the station arm so that it is unencumbered to go about the rest of its tasks. Mike Fossum is going to take the foot restraint that he installed on EVA 2 back from ESP3 and translate it back down to the lab. We need to remove this APFR so that the ESP3 can be relocated during the stage. After he's complete with that, he will move his way out to the JPM, where he will begin the task that we outlined earlier. His first task is in reference to the 2 cameras on the robotic arm on the GEM. The first one is the WVE, or wrist vision equipment. He'll remove the launch lock and MLI cover, or thermal cover, and stow that in a bag. Then he'll move to the EVE, or elbow vision equipment. It has a similar launch lock and thermal cover that he will remove. The last item here on the end cone is to remove the 3 launch lock bolts from the aft window shutter. And now both of these window shutters can be opened and closed by the crew inside the vehicle as they desire. Mike will then work his way to both sides of the JLP actually to deploy these deployable MMOD shields shown here. There's actually a separate handle to deploy each. This is the handle that Mike will access in order to deploy the shield. He'll rotate this handle out, and then it slides along a track down in this picture. And as he slides that down, this MMOD shield actually deploys. And again, that is protecting the mating surface between the JLP and the JPM from any orbital debris. Last thing to do is to close or stow the handle in its locked position, and then close up the door. So while Mike is working on all of that, Ron will be translating back up to the backside of the starboard truss here to connect the nitrogen tank to the ammonia tank. Once again, he's going to open the shower curtain, and then he will disconnect the nitrogen lines from their temp stow location on the NTA, or the nitrogen tank, and then route them over to the ammonia tank. After he's complete with that, he'll close up the shower curtain. He's then going to work his way down to the station airlock, where he will pick up the external television camera group, which was left in the airlock for thermal reasons. He'll pick that up and translate it out to the port side of the truss, again to the far outboard side of P1 on the nadir side, and meet up with Mike Fossum to install this camera. That will complete the end of EVA 3 and the end of all of our spacewalks for this mission.